A courtroom in Pretoria, South Africa, the 20th of April, 1964. A 45-year-old lawyer named Nelson Mandela rises in the dock to address the judges who may send him to the gallows. He has decided not so much to defend himself as to explain himself, and he speaks for nearly 3 hours. He describes his fight against white domination, and he insists against black domination too. He speaks of an ideal of a democratic and free society in which all people live together in harmony and with equal opportunity. And then he says the words that will outlast everyone in that room. It is an ideal for which he hopes to live, but if need be, an ideal for which he is prepared to die. He does not hang. Mandela and the other leaders of the African National Congress tried alongside him are sentenced instead to life imprisonment, and he vanishes behind the walls of a prison on a wind-scoured rock off Cape Town called Robben Island. He has come here by a hard road. For years, the ANC fought apartheid, the system that stripped South Africa's black majority of the vote, of land, of movement, of dignity through peaceful protest. But after police gunned down 69 unarmed demonstrators at Sharpeville in 1960, and the government banned the ANC outright, Mandela concluded that nonviolence had reached its limit. He helped found the movement's armed wing, Umkhonto we Sizwe, the Spear of the Nation, and launched a campaign of sabotage. It was for this that the state caught him, tried him, and buried him alive on the island. He would spend 27 years in prison. He broke rocks in a blinding limestone quarry that permanently damaged his eyes. He was allowed one visitor and one letter every 6 months. And yet, across those decades, something extraordinary happened. The prisoner grew larger than the prison. His name became a banner. Free Nelson Mandela was sung on 3 continents. His face bloomed on walls and badges and concert stages. Governments cut their ties to Pretoria, and investors fled a country that had made itself a global pariah. By the late 1980s, the apartheid regime was cornered. Its economy strangled by sanctions, its townships ungovernable, its Cold War usefulness to the West evaporating. And quietly, from his cell, Mandela had begun to talk with his jailers about how the long nightmare might end. In 1990, it did. A new president, F.W. de Klerk, unbanned the ANC, and on the 11th of February, set Nelson Mandela free. The whole world watched him walk through the gates, gray-haired and upright, his fist raised. What followed was, by any measure, one of the political miracles of the century. Mandela led 4 years of tense negotiation that dismantled apartheid without the racial civil war so many had predicted. In 1994, in the first election in which all South Africans could vote, he became the nation's first black president. He created a Truth and Reconciliation Commission so the country could confront its crimes without drowning in revenge. He invited his white former jailer to his inauguration. Again and again, he chose forgiveness over retribution, and a nation that had every reason to tear itself apart instead held together. He had gone into prison a militant. He came out a peacemaker. And it was that second man, the one who walked free in 1990, who made the miracle. But our world is only one of many. Time runs in branches, and every branch turns on a single moment that might have gone another way. A man who walks out of prison, or a man who never does. Somewhere in that endless web of what-ifs lies a reality in which Nelson Mandela did not live to see the gates open. Let us cross over and follow that world all the way to its end. The moment of divergence comes in 1988. In our timeline, Mandela, by then in his 70th year, fell gravely ill with tuberculosis in his damp prison quarters, was treated in a Cape Town hospital, and recovered to be moved to a comfortable house on the grounds of Victor Verster Prison, where the final secret groundwork for his freedom would be laid. In this timeline, the illness does not relent. The infection takes hold in lungs already half a century weathered by quarry dust, and in the winter of 1988, after 26 years behind bars, with freedom so close that his own jailers were preparing the ground for it, Nelson Mandela dies in custody. The regime's worst fear is realized in an instant. Alive and imprisoned, Mandela had been a problem. Dead in a government cell, he becomes the one thing the apartheid state cannot fight: a martyr. South Africa has already learned what a death in custody can unleash. 11 years earlier, the young black consciousness leader Steve Biko was beaten to death in a police cell and became a rallying cry heard around the world. But Biko had been a rising star. Mandela is the movement itself, the most famous prisoner on the planet, and his death in the regime's hands is a wound of an entirely different order. The news detonates across South Africa. The townships, already smoldering through years of emergency rule, erupt into something closer to a national insurrection. When the government refuses at first to release the body, then tries to dictate the terms of the burial, each decision pours petrol on the flames. The funeral, when it finally comes, draws an ocean of mourners and becomes the largest single act of defiance in the country, history, and a vow. The man who had spent his life insisting that the struggle leave room for reconciliation is no longer there to insist it. In his place, the voices that carry are the ones hardened by grief. Above all, his wife, Winnie Madikizela Mandela. Long the defiant public face of his absence and far readier than her husband to speak the language of fire. For his death removes, at the worst possible moment, the one figure who could hold the center. Mandela's authority had run in two directions at once. He could restrain the movement's most furious voices and, in the same moment, persuade frightened white South Africans that liberation did not mean their annihilation. With him gone, both reassurances vanish. The aging Oliver Tambo, leading the ANC from exile, is himself failing in health. Walter Sisulu and the other elders are still behind bars. Into the vacuum steps a younger and angrier generation, and its hero is Chris Hani, the charismatic, uncompromising chief of staff of the armed wing, adored by township youth who have run out of patience with the long promise of negotiation. The slogan of the hour is no longer talks, it is the seizure of power. On the other side, Mandela's death is seized by the hardest men in the apartheid state as proof that they were right all along. The reformers around de Klerk, who, in our world, found in Mandela a partner they could trust to deliver a settlement and guarantee white safety, now have no such partner and no answer to the securocrats who insist that the only reply to revolution is the iron fist. The cautious reform that opened our timeline's door in 1990 never opens here. Instead, the regime reaches again for the tools it knows best: states of emergency, mass detention, cross-border raids, and the covert death squads that hunt activists in the dark. What follows is the war that Mandela, in our world, talked the country out of. Through the early 1990s, South Africa slides into a spiral of insurrection and repression with nothing to slow it. Umkhonto we Sizwe escalates from sabotage toward open guerrilla war. White far-right paramilitaries arm themselves to resist any surrender, dreaming of a last white redoubt. The Zulu nationalist movement Inkatha and the ANC, already rivals drenched in each other's blood, fall into a township civil war that, without Mandela restraining hand, burns hotter and longer than it ever did in our history. And as the Cold War ends and the regime's last foreign protectors lose all interest in a friendless pariah, the bloodshed deepens without resolving. There is no single triumphant morning. There is only a grinding, year-upon-year slaughter. Nor does the war stay inside South Africa's borders. In the very year of Mandela's death, the apartheid army has fought Cuban and Angolan forces to a standstill at Quito Quanavale, deep in southern Angola, a battle that, in our world, helped persuade Pretoria that its military could not win forever. Here, with the country sliding toward open revolution, the generals dare not loosen their grip. The frontline states that shelter the ANC, Angola, Mozambique, Zambia, Zimbabwe, absorb raid after cross-border raid, while refugees stream the other way. And as the Berlin Wall comes down and the Soviet Union dissolves, the great power contest that once handed each side its patrons simply folds away, leaving South Africans to fight out their agony alone. before a world that has lost the will to step in. Apartheid still falls. It was always doomed, outnumbered, and bankrupt and alone. But it falls the hard way, not handed across a negotiating table but pulled down in fire after a death toll that runs not into the thousands but very likely into the hundreds of thousands. And the South Africa that rises from the wreckage is a different country from the one we know. It is born of war, not of reconciliation. There is no commission to let the nation look its wounds in the eye and choose to go on living. There is instead a reckoning, the settling of scores that always follows when the bill for a long cruelty at last comes due. The hardened movement that takes power owes nothing to compromise and offers little of it. Whites flee by the hundreds of thousands, carrying their capital out with them. The Rainbow Nation, that fragile, luminous idea, is never born. Mandela's face still hangs on every wall, but as the icon of a revolution, the saint of a war, rather than the smiling father of a reconciled people. And yet, even this darker world is not a simple tragedy, and honesty demands we say so. The negotiated miracle of our timeline carried a hidden cost of its own. To win the peace, Mandela's movement left much of the old economic order untouched. And 3 decades on, the real South Africa remains one of the most unequal societies on earth, its black majority still waiting on promises of land and wealth that the settlement quietly postponed. A revolution might have torn that injustice out by the roots, where negotiation only trimmed its branches. Perhaps this parallel South Africa redistributes what ours protected. Perhaps it delivers a harder and more complete liberation. But history offers grim warnings about what grows from the soil of a long civil war. And the likeliest harvest is not justice, but a cycle of vengeance, a strong man to ride it, and a freedom that slowly curdles into a new kind of fear. That is the terrible lesson hiding inside this what-if. We remember Nelson Mandela for surviving 27 years in a cell, and the survival was indeed a wonder. But it was not the cell that saved South Africa. It was the choice he made the day he stepped out of it, to forgive the unforgivable, to take the hand that had jailed him, to insist that the future be larger than the past. Take that one man away at the final hour, and the prison still ends, the apartheid still falls, the freedom still comes. What does not come is the mercy. A people can win their liberation by many roads. The rarest thing in all of history is to win it, and, in the very same breath, choose not to take revenge. This has been Historically Parallel.